This week, 'tis better to give than to receive, but who are you giving to, and who's really receiving the gift? With the help of nonprofit employee and activist Anna Kaminski, we dive into the nonprofit industry and peek behind that shiny charity veneer. Next up, from coast to coast, let's talk the fossil fuel industry, fracking, oil trains, export terminals, oh my. Activists are making gains, but they need your help in taking this fight up to the next level. But first, you have to lose it. A paradigm lost. There's a moment right before you cry, where a tear tears through the walls and the gates that you dutifully place so that this sort of thing won't take place when it shouldn't. There's a moment right before you scream when the waves crash, and though you'd embrace the flood, there's no space, and it has to get out of you or fuck, it'll drown you. Your body convulses, your blood pushes pulses faster and louder, your ears ringing, hear me, your soul scratching, feel me, and then you release. That split-second pause, giving way to the sway of ingrained primal laws, kneeling to the new impulse that claws, a cause that demands its emotion served raw. Jagged you spill from a well-formed facade, honesty cracking those thin, flimsy walls like flash floods and typhoons. The climate has changed. The fake is the fate of a well-groomed primate, primarily pushed out at birth to relate that this system works. Jesus comes first, war close behind, bring out the hearse, emotion is potion from satanic liberals, the same ones who come with this creative drivel. Here is the square, you're the square peg, sit and repeat after me, I am free. But somewhere between the Pledge of Allegiance and that shit show's next season, you found a reason to think. You found a why to question the lies, a moment to try and open your eyes. And that was that moment. The moments before, the moment when you suddenly decide you gotta scream and cry. Now reality quakes with the shock of this real weight, waiting for wake-ups. Godot never showed up, but here's a glimpse of the real neath the fake, the honestly can't obey. The floodgates are opened, the rage is on full steam, and now that you know how it is, your mind will never be the same. In the aftermath, wading through all that has crashed, the built-up resolve that issues were solved by the ones at the top has crumbled. Like stock markets built on the hope that they'll stand, no foundation or safe place to land, and there is no logic to break the fall of a paradigm lost. The shiny disguise that shielded your eyes now fades into shades that betray the proud names of the tenets we shamed. Liberty, justice, freedom, and peace. Your release from the dream is a nightmare indeed. But look on the bright side. FEMA's not in your mind. You are the builder of truth. The new bricks will sit, built on the ashes of vapid and plastic, carved from the real hope and change that you have the power to now rearrange. The present and thereby the future, the torn up landscape that gave way to the screams and the cries that you made, will hold this new city. A real one that's gritty and raw and perfectly real, the kind of beauty you feel, the kind of beauty that these words I now write can't get right, because the power in that single moment, when all that you knew you did know was wrong, is too much for letters, dashes, and periods. It needs a scream. A tear that tears, a fist raised to the air, that moment their paradigm lost, you won. And here's that moment second to none where you smile. This is gonna be fun. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out. Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. The vast majority of human beings on this planet want to do good. That's not really news. If given the chance, we'd opt for peace, enough food to eat, clean air, and fewer assholes. That's why a lot of us feel good about giving to charity groups and nonprofit organizations, particularly if we can do so from a cute little DIY hipster jar like that. We feel that in some small way we're doing our part, that our money can be our action, that our dollars will go to those actually doing something so that we don't have to. Okay, you're getting the point that I don't think donating to charity is enough, and no, I don't. If all you do is donate money to charity, step it up, people. This world isn't going to be saved by throwing a few dimes in an envelope, marking it the good guys, and going about your day. But outside of this issue of activism light, There are other reasons why we should question the gift of giving. For example, where does the money that you give go? Does it really go to research or to that panda or to the poor and hungry? And with regards to large foundations, are they just tax havens for their founders? Opportunities for the rich to look like philanthropes when they're really just not? Like Mark Zuckerberg, for example, founder and CEO of Facebook, who recently announced that he'd be giving away 99% of his Facebook shares to charity. God, that sounds great. But what does that really mean? Well, as Lindsay McGoey, author of No Such Thing as a Free Gift, explains, through setting up an LLC, Zuckerberg has skirted any requirements to publicly list any grants made to either for-profits or non-profits. His giving can take place in total secrecy. Zuckerberg can legally offer the bulk of his philanthropy to any for-profit recipients he wants and still receive public acclaim for gifting his fortune. We're seeing the rise of a new horizontal philanthropy, the rich giving directly to the rich at a level that's completely unprecedented. In other words, Zuckerberg is not obligated to ensure that his charitable giving actually goes to charity. And McGoey says this is nothing unusual. In the United States, study after study has shown that less than a third of all charitable giving from foundations and individuals is geared towards people who are living in situations of extreme economic need. Inequality is fueling the current philanthropic surge, but far too few people are examining whether this solution is actually making a difference to inequality levels or simply entrenching existing wealth gaps. For example, the Bill Gates Foundation can give millions to MasterCard, the credit card company, claiming that the gift is in line with their charitable mandate. And that's that. There's no follow-up. There's no insurance that the money given to MasterCard will go to something useful, other than, say, those fucking priceless billboards. And of course, the irony here is that this sort of parallel giving is only made possible by a system that creates wealth like this. A system that creates a powerful 1% that then overtakes the role of government in supposedly supplying aid to the needy. So we're subsidizing big corporations and foundations instead of the poor who really need the subsidizing, trusting that the big foundations will pick up the slack, oohing and ahhing when we hear that they did, and never questioning why the fuck we give money to the rich to give to the poor instead of just cutting out the middleman altogether. Now, all of that being said, I'd be 100% full of shit if I didn't admit that there are some incredibly badass nonprofits out there. And furthermore, yes, due to our current political and economic situation, it's clear that we do need some of these nonprofits. There are fuck tons of nonprofits, and not all of them are in it to evade taxes and throw money at their rich friends. The idea of giving is still a good one. The idea of helping others is still a good one. As with many other issues, this one has nuance. It's not perfectly black and white. Of course, nonprofits aren't all bad, but they're not all good, and that is something we have to admit and look into further. And in the name of digging deeper, I spoke with creative activist and nonprofit connoisseur, if you will, Anna Kaminski. She offers up a first-person perspective of the nonprofit industry, the questions that we need to ask, and the shades of gray that we need to notice. Take a look.
So I've worked in nonprofits for like 7 or 8 years. I've done work in prison abolition organizations. I've done work with international aid organizations. I've done work with anti-war organizations and homeless services, pretty much across the gamut. Every experience was led to a certain level of frustration for me. And that, for me, while frustrating, I gleaned a lot of important insights about the nonprofit world from each organization I worked with. As a millennial, and I think most millennials are this way, we have a tendency to look very deeply into issues, especially millennials that are working in the nonprofit industry. They really have a deep understanding, or gain one rather quickly, because of both self-reflection and organizational reflection about funding structures of organizations. So they see really quickly that there is a lot of mission drift within organizations, which means that corporate funders or foundational funders can very easily co-opt an organization's mission, which leads an organization then to be responsible to funders instead of the clients that they're trying to serve.
What do you think about philanthro-capitalists, as they call them, that have supreme faith in this capitalist system and are therefore their giving is based on the premise of market expansion, and it's not actually going to solve the ultimate problem of poverty and disease, which is this forever extractive system of capitalism?
Well, I guess I don't see it as so black and white. I don't see philanthrocapitalists. Of course, I really understand that people like the Gates Foundation, for instance, or the Carter Foundation, or the Rockefellers. I don't think they are all bad. I want to think they're all bad, but I know that we can't simply reduce it to that. That they're only after their own self-interest in donating money or time. They do a lot of good things, and nonprofits do a lot of good things. The larger issue is what the organizations are doing with the funding that they're receiving, or rather, what they're allowing what amount of input they're allowing these foundations to have on what they're doing. So, if, for instance, the Ford Foundation, I mentioned to you earlier that Laura Poitras receives money from the Ford Foundation. So did an organization called Insight, which is sort of a radical organization founded by women of color, for women of color. And they've done a lot of work exploring what the nonprofit industrial complex means. They received, I think it was like $100,000 grant from the Ford Foundation that was then revoked because of their position on Palestine. So I think these groups and individuals need to be very careful with whom they're receiving funding from, and really need to take a stand against them when they're trying to exert power over an organization's mission statement. People within those organizations need to be cognizant of this issue. There's not enough research, or there's not much research on what the nonprofit industrial complex looks like. Either academic research, it's rarely studied in universities, rarely taught in universities. It's also just not talked about in organizations themselves, because it requires an amount of time and self-reflection that most nonprofit workers just don't have. Secondly, I guess I would say for people that are donating, you really need to be careful with whom you're donating your money to, and make sure that they're an organization that you can trust, and one that stays true to their mission. Just because someone gets money from the Ford Foundation or from the Gates Foundation doesn't mean they're bad. It's about what level of influence that organization or that foundation has over the project. Like I said, the Ford Foundation funded Citizen4. So that's really important to remember. That it's a very nuanced kind of argument. Something to always be thinking about is that a lot of services that nonprofits do provide, at least in the United States and globally for that matter, are services that states should be providing. In my personal opinion, but because the need is so high, it's also unlikely that states are going to be able to do that. We need free clinics right now in the United States. We need organizations that are providing case management to homeless individuals that are in need, that have lost their homes because of the housing crisis. We need students who don't have access to free and reduced lunch on Saturdays and in the summers to be sent home with groceries. And those are all really good things that nonprofits do. I think it is going to expand, but I also think that the funding structures are going to have to change, and that people who do donate are going to have to change how they donate, and what the whole conversation around giving to charity, giving to nonprofits looks like.
And give me an example of that.
I think, for instance, right now, organizations are highly reliant on foundational funding, which I've mentioned. But I think if organizations really choose to take the time to be self-reflective, you can develop alternative models of funding. It's harder, but you can stay more true to your mission that way. And you're not responsible to big donors that are writing you, $1,000 checks or higher, you're responsible to small donors. It's the same thing that the Sanders campaign is doing. It's really about...
Right. I was going to say there seems to be a parallel between like the money in politics issue, same with the nonprofit money in nonprofit issue.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, exactly. It's all about control and systems of power, ultimately. And it's just about finding the best way to subvert that while also participating in it. Because, like I said, organizations do good things, but reevaluation and self-reflection is key, just as in politics, just as in any field.
So, there you have it. Talk that shit out. Do your research. Just as we mentioned last week, adapt smart. And when it comes to nonprofits, donate smart. And again, don't just use a charity as your checked box for activism. Nothing can replace getting out there and doing something. So, in the name of doing something, let's talk about it. For people and planet over profit on this week's Frontlines segment. Before I get into details, I just want to share this with you. Industry expert Dr. Bernard Weinstein spoke at a gas forum in Boston last summer saying, quote, "All those people who were here this morning, meaning fracked gas protesters, they're going to be camped out at Cove Point. Maybe it will be built. I just think the political environmental pushback is going to be tremendous. I'm just real skeptical." So why the hell am I starting you off with this? Because this is the current state of affairs for the fossil fuel industry. They know that they're an outmoded industry. They know they have public opinion against them. And were that public opinion to shift into public uprising, they'd be really fucked. The only thing saving particularly the fracked gas industry right now is the potential for exports. Meet Cove Point. Cove Point is a quaint little community on the east coast of Maryland where fossil fuel fucksticks Dominion want to build a natural gas export terminal. What the hell does that mean? Well, it means a $3.8 billion project consisting of a massive environmental and safety hazard right smack dab in a residential area, cornered on one side by a nuclear power plant and across the bay from a naval base. Really a trifecta of America's worst money pits, dirty energy and military. This terminal would be the gold mine that the industry needs to make fracked gas a feasible economic endeavor. Because currently, that shit ain't worth it. Not domestically, anyway. Since the industry discovered the quote-unquote gold mine of the Marcellus Shale, energy costs have dropped. Significantly, in fact, for businesses and consumers. The price of gas is now around $2.60 per million BTU, a unit of measurement that isn't terribly important because here's the point. Gas sells at $7 in Europe and over $10 in Northeast Asia, 4 times more expensive. Furthermore, as of right now, fracked gas is pretty much just a North American gig. China is sniffing it out, but can't quite make it happen, and oh hell's bells if it isn't worth at least a few coastline communities just to shove it in China's face that we're number one. So, with this in mind, the industry is pushing hard for the export terminal at Cove Point, pulling gas in from pipelines and liquefying it to the tune of some 3.3 million tons of greenhouse gases a year, 85 1,000-foot-long tankers carrying explosives and discharging millions of gallons of ballast water into the Chesapeake Bay, the clearing of forests, the burying of waterways, the stockpiling of toxic and explosive chemicals like benzene, acid gases, propane, and ethane, and to top it all off, no emergency evacuation route, no trained emergency personnel, no environmental or human impact reports, and not one fuck given by local politicians or law enforcement, the latter of which is getting an extra $1.5 million a year to be the bully boys of Big Dominion. But then again, fuck China, right? No. What is this, fucking middle school? Who gives a flying fuck what the price of gas is at? What's the price of the air that you breathe, you dumb shit greedy fucks? And you know what'll create more jobs than a ticking time bomb of an export terminal? Or the pipeline equivalent? Green energy. You know what'll be less toxic than a malfunctioning nuclear power plant or a fracked water seeping through your faucet? A malfunctioning solar panel. This isn't about what makes the most sense for people or planet. It's about what makes the most sense for the fossil fuel industry. That dying beast. What makes sense for the outdated, hyperinflated, fat cat, dumbass coal, oil, and gas industries. The cutely named Atlantic Sunrise Pipeline isn't meant to build jobs. It's meant to cut through protected lands, pull people from their homes via eminent domain, and above all, maintain the status quo while continuing the capitalistic extraction until this planet has nothing to do but dry heave up a petrified wood shard, which will then attempt to burn, not really realizing that the fucking thing is now basically rock. You know? It's really too bad that we can't run our system off of stupidity because fuck me, we have an endless supply of that shit. But in lieu of that, members of this broad coalition of groups and individuals continue to spread skepticism like sunshine over solar panels. Last week in DC, several of these groups met up to discuss their growing efforts against the industry, joining forces and future actions. It was pointedly clear at this meeting that it doesn't matter whether you live in the shadows of the terminal being built, or in the pipeline's path, or even if you're hundreds of miles away. This has to do with the industry as a whole. This has to do with the world of fossil fuels. A greenwashed sinkhole of fracked water and poison gas. This has to do with our future as a country, as a people, and as a fucking planet. As activist Pennsylvania resident and Lancaster Against Pipelines member Tim Spees put it, this isn't just about a pipeline. It's about social injustice, climate change, political corruption. It's about so many things, and there are no borders. So revolutionaries, get your calendars and your follow list out because you're going to want to know and connect with these groups. First up, we are Cove Point, the aforementioned group living in that aforementioned shadow of the export terminal, pushing to keep it from being finished. They have actions ongoing, and in fact, one coming up on January 21st, where they will hold a protest outside of Bank of America, pushing them to remove their loans in this $3.8 billion project. A little aside here, you may remember seeing that banner drop during a football game in North Carolina, home base for Bank of America. Same deal. One of the most effective ways to kill this project is to suck it dry of funds. Time and pressure can do that, but divestment can do it too. We will post that exact link on our Facebook page on for the event. And you can, of course, link to it off of their website. Next up, SEED, which stands for Stopping Extraction and Exports Destruction. SEED represents a larger coalition of groups and people fighting the whole bastion of fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas. Next up, Lancaster Against Pipelines. Nothing too cryptic there. This organization is specifically fighting the Atlantic Sunrise Pipeline. Oh, and arts and crafts people, listen up on this one. Lancaster Against Pipelines is also the home to the PA Quilt Project, a collection of personally designed quilt squares sewn together to represent the larger issue of fracking and our connectivity on the issue of fossil fuel extraction and environmental destruction. To make and send in your square to be a part of this traveling creative activism project, visit the site above and click on PA Quilt Project. And finally, our friends Beyond Extreme Energy. You may have heard us mention them in previous episodes when we took you into the belly of the fossil fuel industry's beast, FERC. BXE has been battling the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission tirelessly, whether that be fasting or occupying or chaining themselves to the entrances. FERC is the government agency responsible for giving a green light to new extractive projects, which it has done with reckless abandon, with no concern for people or planet, just for profit. On January 21st in the morning, BXE will be disrupting the FERC monthly meeting in central DC, something they call truth interruptions. You can learn more about that on their site as well. And that just about does it for that coast, revolutionaries. Now, let's head west and take a look at the fossil fuel front lines on the left coast. Oil trains. Many moons before the Keystone XL was rejected, fossil fuel companies had their sights set on the Pacific Northwest as an export point for crude oil, fracked gas, and coal, bound for Asia and beyond. As noted, the Marcellus Shale on the East Coast has made places like Cove Point another mouth-watering spot for export. But now that Congress has lifted the ban on exporting crude oil, the industry is throwing their full weight behind upping the oil by rail business in order to export more filth. To give you an idea of where they're ramping it up from, in the past 6 years, oil by rail in the U.S. has increased 4,111%. And as Eric Ross from Backbone Campaign further explains, one proposed new oil export infrastructure project will result in more than 300 mega oil tankers annually, each transporting more than 3 times as much oil as was spilled in the Exxon Valdez spill. Just traveling underneath the city of Seattle, there can be more than 750 oil trains a year, with 100 cars each. The Wall Street Journal estimated that each tank car carries crude oil with the energy equivalent of 2 million sticks of dynamite. A U.S. Department of Transportation analysis predicted over 192 derailments over the next 2 decades due to this increase. In other words, the trains will derail, and when they do, the equivalent of 2 million sticks of dynamite will derail with them. Not to mention the toxic impact of crude oil on land, water, humans, plants, and animals. I mean, are you fucking kidding me? And under the city of Seattle, talk about a densely fucking populated area. To give you an idea, take a look at this oil train blast map outlining the coast of Seattle. The red indicates the necessary evacuation area, about a half mile across. The yellow indicates the impact area, double that. Needless to say, if these projects go through, it's just a matter of time before Seattle, and really any other fucking community on the path of the oil train, gets hit hard with toxic explosives. And that is a point that Eric wants to make clear. The truth is, any community where there is current or new fossil fuel extraction and transportation infrastructure is now a frontline community, and an opportunity for us to assert our values and demand the future we deserve. A future that secures equity, justice, and affirms the well-being of all. The Pacific Northwest is one of the places where we most poignantly see the conflict between these two worlds and ideologies collide. It's going to take people stepping into their courage out of complacency and building the power of we the people to win. Fucking men, Eric. Fucking men. To step into that courage, check out the group that Eric organizes for, Backbone Campaign. You've heard us mention them before. A fantastic artful activism group that does everything from banner drops to paper mache heads. They have activist trainings and action camps, and of course, a long list of direct actions to take part in, including one of my favorites, projections. You can check out 350.org and Rising Tide as well, 2 other organizations that have also been leading the direct action initiative against these oil train plans, corresponding pipelines, and export centers. And with that, revolutionaries, we'll call it an episode. You have lots to dig into, quite literally from coast to coast. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, please spread and share this with all of your friends, foes, and people you don't know. As usual, check out the last slide to see all the sites that I mentioned in this week's show, and be sure to follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. From the Devil's Den, good night and act out.